This video is a first look at the Crisis and Control expansion of Hegemony. It will go over the elements of that expansion that are not Automas. Crisis response is a variation on the IMF intervention, and this will modify the rules that are on the back of the general rule aid and toward the back of the rule book. So instead of following the rules that are laid out in the traditional game, you are going to ignore that and now focus on what is on these cards. So what will happen is at the beginning of the game, you will shuffle this deck of different interventions, and you'll put it face down, and you'll flip one over where everybody can see it. And if you have a situation where IMF intervention is necessary, you are going to follow the steps that are here. So again, instead of the traditional version where you discard bills, change the politics table and apply the effects, and then pay off loans, and then lose legitimacy, you are now going to have the 5 steps here, which are very similar, but are going to have different impacts. So first of all, you're going to discard bills in the areas where the policy says you need to do that. So in this situation, you only do that in 2 and 7. And so then you change the policies in 2 and 7 to 2C and 7A, and then you do whatever the additional effects are on that card. And in this case, each class is going to give the money to the state until the state can pay off its loan. So the state might like that one. But then the state gets -1 legitimacy for each class for every 10 that they get. So they're getting the money, but they're paying for it. So they're going to do that. So in between that, though, they do have to pay off their loan. So that's going to happen. So the 5 steps: discard proposed bill, change the policies, additional effects, pay off loans, and legitimacy is lost. So very similar, but is going to have some specific twists on this that are not present in the regular game, and it might impact some of these policies in different ways. Sometimes maybe better, but sometimes worse than just a standard IMF intervention. For example, this card right here, basic IMF intervention, is gonna, just like we do in the normal game, discard proposed bills, and then you change these policies. But notice now these little lock symbols. What this means is these 2 lock tokens will be put onto 1 and 3, and now players cannot propose bills, not only in this round, but next round too. So those bills are stuck then for an entire extra round, which hinders everybody who wants to make a change in those areas. So the additional effect is re-emphasizing that point. You pay off your loans, and then legitimacy is lost. So this card is very similar to the original rules, except by adding the locks and making it so that there's an additional round where those 2 proposals cannot go through. There are these bond cards that are used with the new government bond program. And in this, you would use this only before the 5th round. Notice if it's the 5th round, you draw a new one. You don't discard proposed bills. You don't change policies. But each class in reverse player order may pay 30 or 50 to the state. If they can't pay off the state's loan, they return that money and they draw a new card. But if it is enough to pay off the loan, the state pays its loans and nothing further happens, but it must pay back 40 or 70 to the class to get the money back by the action phase of the next round. So they're basically loaning the government money. So if they pay 30, they have to pay 40 back. And on the back side, if they pay 50, they have to pay them back 70. So that's what that card does, which is another twist on the IMF intervention. The alternative events deck is a new events deck that can be used to replace the traditional one. The regular one with the base game is the one that is black, and this one is white in color, so it's easy to differentiate between the two. The major difference with the alternative events deck, in addition to just being different cards, is the fact that it plays a little bit differently. So in the regular game, when you have your 2 events out on the table, the state player needs to accomplish their 2 goals and finish them and discard them by the time they are done with the round, or else they are going to have the consequences of not finishing them. Well, that is going to be the same with the alternative events. They're going to have their events out and available to use on the board, but the difference now is when they accomplish their goal, instead of discarding it, they are going to give the card to the player who they had the benefit for. So they spend 30, then choose a class. So they could choose the middle class or the capitalist class here. And when they choose that class, they are going to give this card to that person, that player who controls that class. And notice on the bottom of the card, there's some more text. It says, production phase, get 5. You may assign workers to one of your companies before it produces. So the player that you give this card to can either discard this card for 1 victory point, or they can keep it and get that benefit for the rest of the game. They can stack up more of these throughout the game. So if, for example, they accomplish that, and let's say I gave it to the middle class player, and then I followed that up by accomplishing this, spend another 30, then choose a class. And if I chose the middle class again, I would give them the card, and now they could just take these cards and stack them and then be able to get every benefit that is given to them. So it creates a very different gameplay because it makes it so the different classes can benefit. The benefits for the state seem to be a little bit stronger up here on the top to balance out the fact that they are serving the other classes pretty well by giving them these extra bonuses. But that is how the alternative events will play differently. When the class is chosen to get the benefit of the card, they get to keep it or discard it immediately for that extra point. If they do not discard the card immediately, then they're not able to get that victory point later. One thing to note with the interaction of the immediate response action card with these alternative events. So since the events play differently now, the immediate response allows players to choose an event and perform the action twice. So with that, the way it'll work is whichever faction you give the first benefit to will automatically get the 1 victory point that they would have gotten if they discard the card. And then the second player that you give the card to will get to do what they would normally do, where they can either choose to keep the card or they can choose to discard it to get that victory point. The hidden agendas are the next addition to the expansion. So with hidden agendas, each player has 5 of these cards that they are able to use secretly from the beginning of the game. So when the game is just starting during setup, each player will draw 2 of these cards and they will choose 1 of them to keep, and they will return the other 4 cards to the box. They stay hidden, and whenever a player accomplishes the goal that is on the card, they can gain the reward that is on the card. So they have different indicators. So for example here, okay, so let's use this working class card as an example. You have to pass 3 bills you've proposed during the same elections phase. That's what this card is requiring you to accomplish. So it will focus the working class player on accomplishing that goal. And whenever they do that during the elections phase, they will get 10 victory points. Some of these are anytime. So for this one, for the middle class, have full 8 fully operational companies and have workers in at least 5 public and or capitalist companies in addition to that, anytime you accomplish that, you get 10 points. Right? So some of these cards are at the end of the game as well, or during the scoring phase here. So really the bottom of the card, it will tell you when you can accomplish that goal and how many points you will get. Now, each card is different. They have different totals. So it is really a random pick of the draw. But it adds an element of giving each team extra goals that the other sides don't know what they are trying to accomplish. So it adds a little extra flavor to the gameplay. Lastly, this expansion has 20 additional action cards, 5 for each player. These action cards are differentiated from the action cards in the base game with the 2 dots on the sides of the card. So if players decide to use these cards for one game and don't want to use them for the next, that is how they can determine which ones they want to take out when playing in the future. So how are these cards different than the cards that are already in the decks? These ones are very interactive. Not every single card, but many of them have very interactive activities that happen. So, for example, with this political scandal, you're not just getting influence, you are instead taking the influence from another player. Or choosing a policy, no bills may be proposed by anyone on that policy. So it's going to affect other players when these cards are used in the deck, which will create even more interactivity between the different players.